Okay, Mr. Chair, I was offline for a second. Can you guys hear me now?
What's that?
I fell off for a minute. I just got back on.
Little bit of an echo, Stash.
Stash, are you calling in from like a big canyon? Because it sounds normal if you're in a big canyon.
Yeah, I'm a canyon crick here.
It's just
You're on mute if you are. Can you say something, Stash? Hmm.
Can you hear me?
yeah, that sounded good.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. I think I'm good now.
Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome to the Alaska Board of Game meeting. We call the meeting to order at 3:34 p.m. on Thursday, July 20th, 2023. There are 7 board members present. Before we get started with the business items on the agenda, I'd like to ask board members and staff to introduce themselves. So board members, let's have each board member state their name and where they reside. First with Stosh.
Yeah, good afternoon, Stash Hoffman from Bethel.
Okay, Al.
Good afternoon, everybody. Al Barrett from Fairbanks.
And Jake.
Hello, everyone. Jake Fletcher, Talkeetna.
James.
Good afternoon, everyone. James Cooney from Eagle River.
And Ruth.
Hello, everyone. This is Ruth Cusack from Chugiak.
And our newest member, Dave Loring. You need to unmute.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Loring from Fairbanks.
Okay, and welcome to Dave. And I'm Jerry Burnett from Juneau. At this point, we'd like to introduce staff, and we'll start with the agency representatives and their staff. So first, Deputy Commissioner Ben Mulligan.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. This is Ben Mulligan, Deputy Commissioner for the department.
And Ryan Scott.
Good afternoon, everyone and board members. I'm Ryan Scott, and I'm the Acting Director of the Division of Wildlife Conservation out of Juneau. And joining me today, I have Natalie Weber, our Program Coordinator or Regulations Program Coordinator, as well as Todd Rinaldi, the Management Coordinator for Region 4, Lincoln Perrett, and Jason Sykowski, the Regional Supervisor and Management Coordinator for Region 3.
Okay, Carolyn Brown.
Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Brown. I'm the Statewide Research Director and the Acting Operations Manager for Subsistence. And I am, I think, the only subsistence staff on the call today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Christy.
Good afternoon, Christy Tibbles, the board's executive director based out of Juneau, and joining me to make this all happen is Henry Alicia, based out of Anchorage with Fordsport.
Okay, thank you. And with the Department of Law, we have Cheryl Brooking, I believe.
Cheryl Brooking from Anchorage.
And from Department of Public Safety, Major Frenzel.
Good afternoon, Aaron Frenzel, Alaska Wildlife Troopers.
And from the Office of Subsistence Management, I believe we have George Pappas on.
Good afternoon, George Pappas, OSM State Subsistence Liaison. Good afternoon, team.
Okay, did I miss anyone? If not, before we start, there's a couple of housekeeping and process items to cover. I'd like to see board members and staff to please try to stay muted when not speaking, and then remember to take yourself off mute when needed. It's also helpful for board members and staff who are speaking to have their video cameras on. And if you can't, there's some of us have bandwidth limitations and unable to use cameras. So you're going to have to speak up if you want to be recognized. And if you need to speak, encourage you to use the hand raise feature. So Christy will help me look for those. I can usually see them, but you know, I'm getting old, my eyes are going. Just kidding. So if you want to speak, please use the hand raise feature. The purpose of this meeting, the special board meeting, is to discuss the following topics. Possible formation of a board committee with authority to form a working group for the purpose of making recommendations to the board for future management of Dall sheep in Unit 19C. To assign a board member to serve on the Big Game Commercial Services Board, and to discuss submitting a letter to the Federal Subsistence Board regarding federal Nelchina caribou hunts. The special meeting and topics were requested by 2 board members under the authority of the Alaska Statute 1605-310. And for the first 2 items, they were requested by Vice Chair Hoffman and myself. And the 3rd item was requested by Al Barat and myself. The meeting is open to the public for listening only via web stream or phone line. The audio will also be posted online after the meeting for those who are unable to listen live. The board will not be taking public oral testimony at this meeting. However, written public comments were solicited and are part of the board meeting record. All meeting documents, including the agenda, notice, public comments, are posted on the meeting website, accessible from the board's website at www.boardofgame.adfng.alaska.gov. With regards to ethics disclosure statements by board members, since the purpose of this meeting is to address administrative business, board members do not need to provide the statements at this meeting. Are there any questions before we begin the meeting from board members or staff? If not, we'll go to agenda item number 2, the possible formation of a board committee with authority to form a working group for the purpose of making recommendations to the board for future management of Dall sheep in Unit 19C. And if I could ask Vice Chair Hoffman to make a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Board of Game establish a special committee for the purpose of working with the department and stakeholders to form a working group to make recommendations to the full board regarding the future management of Dall sheep in game units 19C. Charlie.
Do I have a second?
Second it. Al Brett.
Been moved and seconded. At this point, board member discussion. Okay, Al, you have your hand up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was waiting for somebody else. Well, I'm going to come out. I'm not going to support forming a committee to discuss having a work group. I think we've really hashed this out with the 3 prior sheep working groups that we had in 2015 and 2016. And I think if there was a group that wanted to form a working group and discuss some management options for the board to consider, I would leave that to the local ACs and the department to work together and and let them come up. As the advisories committee's role is to advise the Board of Game on issues like that, especially when it comes to a localized area. And so for those reasons and many of the comments that I read that were submitted, I'm not going to support having a committee.
Thank you, Al. Not seeing other hands raised. Jake, do you have any comment? Or Dave, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not going to support forming a committee either. I was part of that sheep working group as a public member, the big one we had in Anchorage. And it just didn't get us any place. And I really believe that Fish and Game has given us all the information we need to manage that population in Unit 19. And indications are that it was everything that is affecting those sheep has to do with weather and other natural causes, and the working committee can't really work with that and give us recommendations on that. And I do support the advisory committee process and the Board of Game process in coming up with solutions for management of that particular sheep population. So I will not be
Thank you, Dave.
supporting that.
Thank you, Stosh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree somewhat to what some of the board members who just spoke, some of the stuff they said, but on the other hand, I was part of these other working groups before, and we're in a different situation now. Things have changed drastically since then, and these ACs, the local ACs closest to the resource have asked for this committee, and we've had great success with committees. The Unit 23 working group, Koyukuk River Moose Management Plan, Kodiak Brown Bear Plan, Unit 4 Brown Bear Plan, those all worked well, had produced good, really good information, and I think, if we move forward with this and create it carefully and make sure, we include all user groups and kind of follow what some of these other groups did, it could go a long ways to help guide the Board of Game and the department. And one of the bigger ones is probably stop a whole lot of proposals coming down the pipe. So I don't see a problem with it. I think it's wanted. I think local users want it. Residents want it. I read the comments, and it was, about half and half. So I can fully support this. And Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Jake, do you have a comment?
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support this too wholeheartedly. This is a really, really huge deal. I think the more information we can all get together and hash out about this particular population and coming up with a plan would be for the best.
Okay, any additional comments? I'm fully in support of this. That's one of the reasons I put my name on calling this. I've discussed it with the department. There's, there were comments from Dave Loring and Al Barrett about the sheep population, but the issue is not just the sheep population, it's the conflicts between users. Our job as the board is allocating the limited resources we have between uses. And sheep are valuable commodities for guiding. They're also valuable commodities for residents, and I think it's very important when sheep populations go up and down for the department or for the board to have put people together and discuss what to do when those sheep populations go up. What do we do when they go down? Do we make, we closed it to non-residents after a year when 90% of the sheep that were taken by non-residents. in a place where historically it's been maybe 50-50. It's a big deal, and the discussion isn't about full curl management and whether that gets the sheep to rebound or not rebound. It's also about the people who are using it and what they're using it for. James.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple of questions. So, if this were to be approved, then what does this look like? Have we set any of the parameters on that? Or is it just a vote to move forward with the establishment of one?
Okay, if I could go, we would establish a 3-member committee at this meeting. That committee then would work with the department and with user groups to establish and put the parameters for a stakeholder group together that could work on addressing the issues. And whether they came up with a full management plan or something, is it going to be up to that committee? That we can't, presuppose what the results of the planning is going to be. But the board committee would have public meetings and decide the membership of the task force, discuss ways of doing it. There would be able to work with board staff and the department on how to set up meetings and use Zoom or whatever to get public involvement. But exactly how they do it, how many meetings it would take, and I would expect them, since we're going to have sheep proposals for 19C at our meeting in March. There's a number of them that came in for that, and most of them are simple. Reopen it to non-residents, or I suspect, or put people on a draw, or leave it the way it is, forever. But I think this is important to do it. But this meeting would be just establishing a committee, and that 3-member committee would work with the department and the public on a task force, and then come back to the department, to the board, with recommendations.
No, thanks. And just one follow-on question, Mr. Chairman, and forgive me for not knowing the history here, but so is there a precedent that the Alaska Board of Game has in the past where we have established some sort of board, separate from the Board of Game, obviously, but established for something, for a similar purpose? Whether it's successful or not is not, that's irrelevant. I'm just trying to understand the formation of it is what I'm trying to understand.
Yes, we have. And in fact, in the 2015, they had a sheep committee and working groups. And that committee did not come to a successful conclusion with recommendations to the board, which were adopted at that point.
But other species, what I meant too is, so it's not, this isn't an anomaly, I guess, that was.
No, it's not an anomaly. It's an accepted way that the board could do business. Ruth.
Yeah, who would this committee report to? Would it be to the department, or?
The committee would be reporting, it won't report to anyone until the conclusion, that is, they're the ones, the committee would be responsible for making a recommendation to the full board. And the board may adopt their recommendation or not at a public meeting in the future.
Okay, thanks.
They can't actually make a I mean, all they can do is make recommendations. Stosh, do you have your hand up?
Yeah,
No.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Just a little follow-up from some of the last 2 comments made from newer board members about this. I was fortunate enough to participate in the Unit 23 Western Arctic Caribou Herd Working Group as a new board member. It was amazing to watch all the different groups work together. And, not everyone had different perspectives, different ideas. And, we had the whole spectrum there, and it was amazing to watch everyone working together for the benefit of the resource. And not everyone agreed on everything, but they agreed to disagree, that, they had it was amazing to watch, and I think it produced a lot of good results, and that's what I think this will do. And just to let the other board members know, there's several other working groups that the board has created over the years. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Scott. Dave,
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd like maybe the department can answer this question about what the cost would be and who the facilitator would be on this particular working group if it does happen. I know the last one we had on the sheep was very expensive and we didn't get any place with it, as you mentioned. And what a special interest group people there that had, that were kind of clashing during the meeting. We just couldn't come up with any kind of recommendations on that when I was part of that particular group myself. And then another question too, or another comment was on some of these other working groups we've had, like Western Nordic caribou or the wood bison. We were dealing with populations or new populations or populations that were in decent conditions, but we just had conflicts with user groups, whether it's subsistence or sport or guiding. I think on this particular sheep in this area and other places in the state also where the sheep populations are way down, and we have population issues that are outside of the types of questions we had in these other working groups. I mean, we have situations that are dealing with predation and weather mostly, and not so much hunting. And so I guess if we can find out what the costs were and who the facilitator would be of a new working group, and just my comments about this particular working group is completely different in my view from other working groups that I've been involved with or have listened to. Thank you.
thank you, Dave. And Ryan, do you have any, or Christy, have any comments to answer his question?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, through the chair to member Loring. So, the department's done a little bit of digging and a little bit of looking into how the last working group went to try to specifically look at cost. We don't have a good cost estimate for this. I don't think it's going to be cheap, given just some general conversations about the number of meetings and some travel that'll be involved, staff time that'll be involved. As far as a funding source, that also hasn't been settled. We've looked at a couple just preliminarily because we want to wait for this meeting to actually see where things go. We've looked at everything from internal to third party funding as well, and that's going to take some time and various administrative work to do that. I have spoken to one facilitator just in the interest of seeing who might be interested and who's around. Many of, well, I would almost say all of the folks that were involved in the last couple efforts have retired and moved on to other things. However, I've spoken to one. We don't have a good cost estimate because we don't quite know the scope yet. I'm going to put it in the ballpark of $50,000 to $60,000, given the information I know.
Thank you, Ryan.
Can I just follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I mean, cost, I was just kind of curious about that. I know that this is an expensive process, but don't get me wrong, the cost is well worth, coming up with a solution to what the problem is. It's just probably dropping the bucket at the big picture, obviously, but so that was my thoughts there on that. I was just kind of curious how that was going to come down and who might be the facilitator and on how that works, because a good facilitator can really, make the process successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Jake?
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Whenever you called me earlier, I didn't want to sound presumptuous. I'm not saying that if we do form this group, that they're going to come up with a plan, but if we get a bunch of people together and we hash out and come up with like one good idea, that's one more idea than we have together. right now, and even if it's something that we're coming up with this group, and somebody comes up with a ways to enhance the environment to help the sheep population, mineral supplements, things like that. I definitely think it's worth it. And I think it's definitely worth it investing in 19C.
Thank you. And one point I would like to make is that this is going to be limited. It's not the previous sheep working group was a little more of a global look at everything, and this is going to be more focused on 19C if this committee is put together, rather than trying to solve the whole problem. And I do want to make a little comment on the cost. $50,000-$60,000 might sound like a lot to someone, not so much to others, but it's less than the cost of two non-residents would pay for sheep hunts. So it really isn't that much money, and when you're looking at the resource and when you're looking at the people involved. Al, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've heard the word problem several times now, and I don't know what really the problem is. You mentioned conflicts, user conflicts. Well, we have that in about every hunt that we afford an opportunity to, is some sort of social conflicts. And so I don't know if it's worth going down that road. The other thing is developing the management for 19C. And I don't know, I'm anticipating that wouldn't be codified. So there would be no legality of complying to whatever that management plan is. And I would believe that you couldn't bind one board to, one board's decision on a management plan to a future board. So there's some issues there. And obviously you can't create a plan that's going to predict any kind of situation that may come up in the future. So, I'm still against it. I was at the last sheep working group with everybody else, and I've been at least 6 other working groups, prior to being at the board here. And so, yeah, some have more merit than others, but there seems to be a more focused issue on some of the successful working groups that we've had in the past.
Thank you, Al. You're correct that we can't bind a future, other than putting something in codified, we can't bind a future board. But we do have a number of board policies that stand the test of time, and we have a number of management plans that stand the test of time. And it gives good guidance for future boards. This has been talked about, this has been hashed out, and people have made these decisions. We have policies, and we have that really we adhere to, even though we don't have to. Any additional discussion, Stosh?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a good discussion. And I just want to make a somewhat of a follow-up to some comments that were made about past sheep committees. I stated earlier that, I think we're in a little different situation now. I think that's an understatement, but, that some say that working group didn't work. A very good idea came out of that one group, and that was proposal 206. And everyone may not agree, but after that proposal basically came from that working group. And after that, the proposals for sheep dropped drastically, and that was huge. And that was a product of that working group. And I just want people to know that it wasn't a complete failure in my mind.
Thank you, Stosh. Any additional discussion? Dave, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really give my support to the department and their scientists, and their management, and what their plans are to solve this 19C issue and other populations of sheep in the state. So I don't know that this working group, if it's established, can really give them much more direction than where they're already going. I mean, we're not talking about allocation here. We're not talking about user conflicts. We're talking about biology, and we're talking about populations that are being reduced due to weather and predation. And so I really support the department in their direction. And I guess that's
Well,
about all I say. Thank you.
With all due respect, Dave, I think we are talking about allocations here. I think the board chose this spring to close this to non-residents. And we didn't choose to put it on, to have put this on a draw. We didn't choose to shorten seasons for non-residents or change it. We closed it to non-residents. And that is an allocation problem. And much of the problem that this board can deal with is the allocation problem. And I think people are conflating issues here by thinking that this sheep working group can, restore a sheep population, but perhaps what it can do, as with many of our management plans, is help people work better together. And that's why I support it. Go ahead, Ruth.
Yeah, I think it won't hurt anything. If anything, it does nothing. So I'm more apt to support it. $60,000 isn't really that much money in the whole scheme of things.
Elle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm kind of slightly confused with your last statements that the board, made a regulatory change in Unit 19 at the last board meeting by allocating, to residents only. And I don't see how that would work with the working group when we have the process of the Board of Game, the advisory committees. And if people are still upset or want to see a change in allocation out there, we have that process already in place. I don't really see how a working group would come together and then try to direct the board on how to allocate when the full board already has that authority, and we just deal with it through the proposal system from the ACs and the users and the residents and non-residents.
Well, Al, I'm not sure what this working group might come up with, but it's pretty extreme to close it. The statutory direction for us might be read as to if we want to reduce non-residents, we should put them on a draw system. There are groups that really don't want it to be on a draw system, but they would like non-residents to be able to hunt. There are many other ways of getting to that aren't included in any of the proposals that we've seen. And there's no reason why this committee, which is part of the board, and a working group chaired by that committee can't make recommendations to the board on ways that the board can better allocate resources.
And I appreciate that, but I think we get clear direction through our constitutional mandates and our statutory obligations.
Yeah. Yes, we do have clear, it just doesn't tell us what to do. Or what
That's why
allocation.
we have a seven-member board.
That's right. That's exactly right. And we take recommendations from the public, we take recommendations from ACs, and we can take recommendations from a committee or not of this board. Additional discussion. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, clarify something. The cost analysis that I did is based on previous efforts without a lot of detailed information on, current prices and things like that. So I want to make sure that we understand that it may be more, it may be less. The other thing I do want to point out is, and this has been brought to the forefront in the discussion this afternoon, is that this is largely going to be an allocative problem-solving event. The board has been, pretty clear with full curl management. We continue on that path today. believing that and seeing that weather events are largely, responsible for the declines across the state. The board, should the board move forward, the department will be there to provide biological data, harvest information, survey data. Happy to report people are out doing sheep surveys as we speak, and things like that. But, when we get down to the allocative discussion, the department is going to leave that to the board, to hash that out and to debate it. Again, we're happy to provide the biological data, but certainly, as been pointed out, the allocative nature of things is in the hands of the board.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And Al?
Yeah, just one more thing, Mr. Chairman, and it may be a question for Ryan. Would you be able to work with ACs and provide the same opportunities as the ACs control that meeting and leave the board of game out of it?
Through the chair, Member Barrett, I think we could. It would look different. It would come from a smaller scale, but it really isn't too different than what we're talking about with the full board of game, right? I mean, we provide the biological information to the advisory committees, and then they could make recommendations to the board, based on their feelings for allocation and what they hear and what we provide on the biological data.
Which the statute clearly gives the advisory committees that ability to do and are supposed to do.
I'm going to trust the statutes better than I do, Al.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Stosh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a little follow-up on some comments that were made. And since we're talking about the ACs, in the beginning, the local AC, and we're talking about a specific unit for this working group, 19C Charlie the local AC unanimously supported to stop hunting. They wanted a moratorium to close it to everybody. That didn't happen. It just was we ended up closing it just to non-residents. And this same AC unanimously supports this working group. And so, we're all talking about these ACs. These guys want it. This is for 19C, and this seems to make a lot of sense to me. And I'm really support this. I think it's needed, and the ACs want it, and I think it's going to do a lot of good for the resource. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stosh. Are we ready for the question?
Call the question, Mr. Chairman. Al.
Thank you. Go ahead. Stosh, your hand is still up. Did you have additional comment? Okay, your hand's not up. So, Christy, could you pull the board on the question of establishing the committee?
Got to get off mute.
Got it. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that motion to establish a board committee to work with the department and form a working group to deal with sheep in unit 19C. And then after this motion, if it carries, I suppose
Right.
there'll be some more details pushed out. So I'm going to begin with Mr. Cooney,
Yes.
Mr. Barrett,
No.
Mr. Lauren,
No.
Mrs. Cusack,
Yes,
Mr. Fletcher,
Yes.
Chairman Burnett,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
That motion carries 5-2.
Okay. At this point, then we need to appoint the members to this committee. And I'm wondering if Stosh and Jake want to be on it. Jake, you said yes. And is there anyone else who has a burning desire to be on it? If not, Ruth, would you like to be on it? I can't hear you. You're,
Yes, I would.
okay. Is there any objection to having Ruth, Stosh, and Jake be the members of this board, of this committee? If not, then you guys need to get with Christie, have a meeting and appoint your chair and start working with the department. Go ahead, Christie. You were moving your mouth, but not talking.
Okay, yeah, just a couple other clarifications. That might be helpful at this meeting, but if the committee forms this working group, and you might have said it during this meeting too, but the expectation of the chair of the overall working group also would be a
Right,
board of-
would be the member of the chair of that committee,
Okay,
whoever that is.
and then the board is scheduled to meet mid-November to address ACRs, so that would probably be your time frame that you're looking for. You would expect some kind of committee report back to the full board.
Some committee report, whether or not they have a final report. 19C comes up in the March meeting. So having any recommendations early enough before the March meeting to be available for the public would be the important part. Okay,
That's all. Thank you. And I see Ryan has his hand up, Mr. Chair.
go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah,
Ryan?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess you answered part of my question. You know, the timeline for this. I would remind you that we're about to start hunting seasons and we have
Right.
2 significant Board of Game meetings coming. So, you know, we'll be prepared to help out and do things, but ask for a little bit of understanding that timing is going to be difficult.
Right. I think we probably all understand that. But we all are aware that 19C is up for consideration in the March meeting. So go ahead, Al.
Yeah, so it'd be my understanding that if or any direction comes from this working group to the March meeting, it won't be affecting 19 sheep proposals at all. Because
it
we'd have to act on it as a full board.
Right, we would have to act on it as a full board. This committee has no regulatory authority or ability to change anything. They could have a recommendation, however, that might instruct us better or sway us in how we vote on a 19C proposal.
Yeah, and I'm uncomfortable with that. Not having a full board address the outcomings of a working group at a scheduled meeting for 19C.
I don't understand why.
Because we
That's
wouldn't have had an opportunity as board members to agree or disagree with the outcome of the working group prior to addressing 19C proposals.
We might. It depends on how this working group works and when they are done. That would be the ideal situation, is for it to be done early enough for us to have this and to get a publicly and to the ACs prior to the March meeting.
So my question would be to the Department of Law is if the board took action prior to the March meeting, how far before the March meeting potentially would that working groups or our vote on the working group's findings take effect?
Through the chair, Member Barrett, can you ask that question again? I'm not quite sure I got that. You're looking at the timing of when the board could act?
Right, so if we potentially we'd have to have the findings from the working group prior to the March meeting. And we'd have to take a vote on it as a full board to accept or not accept their findings. Does that, if we accept their findings, does that take effect immediately, or do we have to wait a certain amount of time, or do we have to wait for somebody's signature? What happens on that?
Well, it depends on what the committee or the working group would come up with. If they're going to come up with a proposed management plan, there may be aspects of that that the board would want to adopt in regulation. And that would then probably be a board generated proposal that would be put out for public comment before one of the board's regular meetings next year in, I believe it's January and March. So that would be, make the most sense. Now, the other proposals, the books are usually come out in September. So those are going to be available for the committee to review in conjunction with the other comments and ideas that they develop.
Okay,
I'm not sure if I'm answering your question now.
Yeah, I'm a little confused myself, and I don't want to show up at a March meeting to discuss region 3 proposals or 19C sheet proposals and have this document floating around that the working group had done and not be able as a board member to have made comments on it, and potentially swaying other board members on how to address proposals at that meeting.
I think I heard the timing that some sort of report or recommendations would be available by November. The board has a work session then, although Ryan has already let you know that the timing is a little difficult for department staff. But I see he's got his hand up, so I think maybe he can answer your question better than I can.
Okay to comment, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, board members, I think it is it's almost unrealistic to think that we'll be ready with anything in March. There's an immense amount of stuff that needs to happen on the administrative side before we get going. As I mentioned, the funding source has not been identified. Facilitator has not been retained. And that is all going to take time. And our staff, for this particular topic, they are working on board game proposals now that were submitted in May. So I understand the desire to move forward and have that available in March. Actually, November. I mean, I think that's probably unrealistic at this point. So I would encourage you to consider that as we go through this process, that it is going to take some time. And to rush it, we can't rush some things.
I totally agree with you, Ryan. It's much better to take our time, deal with 19C proposals in March if we don't have this done, just based on what we have, and take this up at a future meeting if there's something of merit. It could be done as an ACR for the 2025 meetings. There's lots of, if it's just findings that we have, it could be adopted at any time, and that doesn't require the same public scrutiny as regulatory issues. But at this point, we've voted to move forward with it. So we'll see what the future holds. At this point, are you ready to move on the agenda? The next order of business, go ahead.
Just one process thing I'd like to make the committee members especially aware that the board committee is subject to the State of Alaska Open Meetings Act. So any work done by the committee, discussions, will occur in an open public meeting. That initial process would happen via Zoom, and I would like to think that that would work well for a committee meeting, but I just wanted to let the committee know that about that type of process and what to expect.
Thank you. Okay, the next thing on our meeting was to appoint a new person to the Big Game Commercial Services Board. And Dave Loring has volunteered to do that. I've been doing it for the last couple of years, and Dave has a lot of experience with that board. He doesn't have a guide license or an assistant guide license or a transporter license, so he's eligible to serve on our behalf. And so I would ask that without objection that we appoint Dave Loring to that board. Any objection? If not, well, congratulations, Dave, and we'll let the board chair and staff of the Big Game Commercial Services Board know that you're on board with them now. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd be more than happy to serve in that capacity. And as you said, I have worked with that board as a public safety liaison for quite a few years, and even back in the old guide board way back when. So I am familiar with their process, and especially their civil process. So thank you very much, and I'll represent the Board of Game at that new board.
Okay, thank you, Dave. It does take some time, and go ahead, Jake. Are you waving your hand?
No, I am. Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to hold up things, but just thinking about it, and the three members of the board here that were picked to be a part of this committee that's gonna be be formed. I know Stosh isn't active, but he's had a assistant guide license. I know Ruth has an active assistant guide license. I'm a registered guide, and I do not want to. I really want to be a part of being a part of one of these working groups, like everybody has commented on earlier. However, I would be interested to hear what other committee or what other board members think about the fact that fact. And like I said, I'm sorry. I should have thought of it earlier. And I'm sorry if we've already moved past it.
Okay, well, so we'll move back up the agenda to discuss that board composition. And Ruth, you do still have a assistant guide license? Is that correct?
Yes, I do. I'm not guiding this year, but I don't think that makes a difference, but
Right.
I do have my license.
From a public perception standpoint, it may be best if we do that, and whether I know Stosh has been very active on this. Dave's been over it before, this ground before, doesn't want to go over it again. I would be willing to serve on this committee if one of the other three wants to step down from it. And
I can go ahead and step down from it.
Okay, if no one has an objection to that, we do that, and that way we have someone who's not an active guide or inactive guide, but has a license and been licensed. There was discussion. I remember it when Stosh's confirmation vote came up about the fact that he had been a guide even. So, people do take it seriously. So if that, then it'll be myself, Jake, and Stosh on the committee. Thank you, Ruth. Thanks for volunteering. Okay, at this point, the last item of business is to consider a letter to the Federal Subsistence Board regarding federal Chena caribou hunts. And before you make the motion, Al, to do that, I'm assuming you're going to make such a motion. A couple of things I wanted to comment on. First, there is ongoing litigation in the area between the state and other entities with caribou. So I want to make sure that any discussion has to do only with the biological aspect of the fact that the department has identified that there's no harvestable surplus in the area. And second, I wanted to point out that the department's EO just closed hunting for Nelchina caribou herd in Unit 13. So to be consistent, that, Al, do you have a motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to adopt that the Alaska Board of Game submit a letter requesting the Federal Subsistence Board to close their Nelchina caribou hunts on federal
Second.
lands.
And we have a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm curious to why you would limit this letter to Unit 13 only and not include Units 11 and 12?
Well, the reason that I pointed that out is because the department's actions identified Unit 13 hunts only.
So if I may ask,
Maybe ask it,
Acting
Ryan.
Director, acting Ryan Scott on why the state hasn't EO'd Units 11 and 12?
Through the chair, Member Brett. So there's been a lot of discussion about Unit 12, and we've actually communicated, I believe we've communicated with the Federal Subsistence Board that we certainly would want to include those, specifically in the longer term, kind of your standard wildlife special action requests. So there's two requests going on, and Deputy Commissioner Mulligan is here, who is our liaison and interface with the board, the Federal Subsistence Board. We have an emergency request for Unit 13 early in the season, and then we'll be pursuing a, quote unquote, regular wildlife special action request for the winter hunts that will certainly include at least Unit 12.
What about 11?
Through the chair, Member Barrett, I know there are ongoing conversations with the Tetlin National Wildlife Refuge for Unit 11.
So am I correct that the department's stance is there's no harvestable surplus of Nelchina caribou?
That is correct.
Okay.
So I'm kind of confused then if there's no harvestable surface or harvestable surplus, that we're not EOing the entire Nelchina caribou range, because any harvest would be not sustainable at this time, no matter if it was federally taken or state taken. In fact, I just found out that the federal side has issued 2 bull caribou permits to the federally qualified people for this year already.
Through the chair, Member Barrett, that is accurate. The Federal Subsistence Board, OSM, has issued those caribou permits at this time. However, as I understand, they are telling hunters to be very cognizant to watch what's happening with the regulatory action on any fall hunts that include Nelchina caribou. I would encourage the board, should you choose to submit that letter, that you do include at least Unit 12. Again, we have ongoing conversations, specifically 12 and 11, but you're not wrong, Member Barrett, that there will be animals out in that range. We were specifically focusing on the early fall hunts that start very soon in the emergency closure request.
Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to probably provide some additional information in this discussion, just as it pertains to the federal side and kind of as we progress to that letter that you've all seen. We submitted that the emergency special action and the temporary special action for Unit 13 because we had already had consultation with BLM and is the body responsible for those federal public lands within Unit 13. And given the pace and the response that we were given, we decided to submit those 2 special actions to take care of Unit 13. As I understand it, we still have regional staff who are interacting with the federal agencies over in the other GMUs. And once it could be, so there's delegated authority. They could choose not to open that up. And we wouldn't have, at least as far as the concern on our side with federal public lands along with ours, we wouldn't need to submit a special action request on those areas if consultation goes well. If consultation goes as it went with BLM, we could be very well submitting an amendment to our temporary special action or submitting a new special action to cover those additional areas, depending on how that goes.
Thank you. Al, go ahead.
Yeah, and a follow-up, so in Unit 12, you still have a state hunt on the books that's open. And my recent research of that take of caribou there, and there's some question on how Todd Rinaldi's staff may or may not count them, but it seems to me that, or at least what was noted in the data, that Nalchina caribou were taken in that harvest ticket in Unit 12. And it seems that the last 3 years I looked at, there was 18 caribou taken that were designated as Nalchina caribou.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment on that?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I'm going to ask Todd Rinaldi to respond.
Thank you. Through the chair, Member Barrett, could you repeat the question? You were asking about the 18 caribou harvested in Unit 12. Is that?
Well, the question is Unit 12 hasn't been EO'd, and there's still a state hunt in Unit 12 by harvest ticket, basically in the Tok management area. And those caribou that have been taken, from what I can gather in the short amount of time that I had, that they were designated by the department, probably by the UEC codes, that those were Nalchina caribou. And so I'm wondering why the department hasn't, since there's no harvestable surplus of Unit 13 or Nalchina caribou, why hasn't the department closed that hunt?
Well, that hunt's not specifically to target Nalchina caribou, and that would be a conversation that we would continue to have with Region 3. There are animals, there are Nalchinas that do get taken in that hunt, much like FC 1702 and 1703, the federal hunts. Out there in Unit 12, we call our animals out there to help the federal government determine whether or not there's a certain mixing ratio out there so that we can limit the number of Mentasta that are taken and that the number of Nalchinas are actually targeted. So in this particular case, this is under a harvest ticket. And we would have to continue consultation with Region 3 because that same harvest ticket can also take harvest 40-mile caribou.
Not in Unit 12.
Not in Unit 12. I stand corrected. Yeah.
And that's my question is, we have no harvestable surplus of Nalchina caribou. The data shows Nalchina caribou are taken underneath that harvest ticket. We can't afford to allow more harvest of Nalchina caribou underneath that general season harvest ticket in Unit 12.
Yeah, so through the chair, Member Barrett, as Director Scott mentioned before, we're trying to deal with the hunts that we need to address now. The lag in the federal process has created the need to move this process forward as fast as possible. Currently, the Nalchina caribou are all in Unit 13, so we don't have an immediate concern of caribou being harvested in Unit 12. There are some caribou that did not return, and I'd have to look at the collar data, but no, that would be an additional area that we would look to EO if we thought that there was going to be an effect on the Nelchina caribou. Caribou that were harvested in past years doesn't mean that they're going to take the same path forward and have the same susceptibility in those same areas. But we'll have to have an ongoing conversation about that area once we get through this first step.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Al. Any other discussion on this letter? And I think
I have one follow-up.
Go ahead, Al.
Just one more. I came across a memorandum of understanding with the Federal Subsistence Board and the Board of Game. And I'm wondering if the federal counterparts, the Federal Subsistence Board, is reluctant to close any of their seasons or reduce any of their take, that they would be in violation of that MOU. And is the department considering withdrawing from that? Because it's pretty explicit, the terms and what the MOU was for, the understanding between the two boards. So maybe Ben Mulligan might be able to answer something like that.
So the MOU, as I understand it, I mean, I know there was one between the department and the Federal Subsistence Board, and that no longer actually is applicable. That has been defunct now for a while. There was attempts, I believe, under the previous administration to try to resurrect that, but there was differences of opinion that couldn't be reconciled. And so that has been put on the back burner for a while. So as far as I know, the MOUs are no longer applicable in our interactions with the Federal Subsistence Board.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so we have the motion on to write the letter, and it's been suggested that it include the entire hunt areas for Nelchina caribou, and which would be unit 13 and 12 and possibly 11. Correct, Al?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and I don't know that we need a voice vote on this. We can do it by unanimous consent. Go ahead, George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a heads up, the two federal special actions, the emergency special actions to close all hunting in Unit 13 for the fall hunt, one submitted by Department of Fish and Game, the other submitted by the BLM and Otna Intertribal Resource Commission. The analysis should be ready for the Federal Subsistence Board for review by July 24th, and decisions expected by July 27th. So if a letter is to be written,
do it soon.
With haste, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so Al, did I properly characterize your letter?
Yes, I'll draft up a letter requesting the Federal Subsistence Board close Unit 13, 12, and 11 to the take of federally qualified care or hunters, or lose that opportunity. So yes, I have it.
If you could do that and send it on to Christie, and we'll get it under my signature to them as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional business to come before the board? Christie, anything?
Oh, well, a quick clarification about that letter is that we heard no objection, so going with unanimous consent on that one, Mr. Chair.
Right, yeah, by unanimous consent, we'll send the letter. And if not, then that concludes our business for today. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn, but I wanted to thank everyone for coming, and I want to thank all the staff, and thank you for your hard work. And with that, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
I move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Need a second? Somebody don't
I second
decide.
that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and motion and a second, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great meeting.
Mhm.